Morning, Darius Battiwalla. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Robin. How are you doing?
I'm all right. Welcome to the Maestro Online.
Thank you.
So, tell us about your journey. Where did music begin for you?
I'm told, I don't remember this, but what I'm told is that my dad was an adult beginner on the piano, and he went for piano lessons, and apparently I used to listen to him practice, and then I'd go up to the piano afterwards and try and copy what he'd been doing. And at that point, they decided to give me piano lessons as well.
That's great. And so that was a traditional classical background in terms of piano?
In some ways, my dad listened to a lot of classical music. My mum actually is pretty much tone deaf, so she doesn't really like music at all. But my dad's a real music enthusiast, and actually when he was head teacher of a primary school in London, he used to give lots of music assemblies about classical music to the children and really be an evangelist for it. So, and the other thing that he listened to a lot were things like Bing Crosby, Perry Como, those kind of things. So they were on in the house as well.
So you had quite a breadth of inspiration at home.
Yeah.
So at what point did your playing develop to a point that you think, yeah, this is something I'm serious about? And
I think it was. I'd always played the piano, and then later it became. I took up the cello, and it was playing in youth orchestra that gave me an enthusiasm for orchestral music. And the organ began the same way it begins for a lot of people: is your local church organist leaves. Oh, who can play the piano? You can play the piano. So come and have a go at playing the organ. And I went to have lessons. And I suppose as I went through school, I quite liked the fact that I could earn more money playing for the odd wedding on a Saturday than my friends could from their Saturday jobs. And I realised that actually that was the thing I was best at, of all the things I did at school, that music was the thing that I seemed to be most at home with. So I suppose it was a gradual realisation like that.
So did you then go from school to music college, or?
I went to university first. I went to Leeds University and took up an organ scholarship. I carried on the cello for a bit, but I was also starting to get interested in conducting at the time. And something had to go, and it was the cello that went. So I stuck with the keyboard instruments, the organ and the piano. And they were very keen, actually. My teacher at university, Graham Barber, he was very keen that I should carry on playing the piano as well as the organ. He thought it was very important that organists had a good piano technique, and I really agree with that. So I'm very glad he sort of pushed me in that direction. And I did go to music college eventually as a postgrad, and that was to do organ and also to do piano accompaniment. So I did a lot of chamber music, playing for singers, and that's a great education doing the piano accompaniment, because you do things like singing lessons, so you learn a lot about singing technique. One thing I did a huge amount of when I was a student just after was playing the piano for choirs and choral societies, and again that's a brilliant music education, because you have to sight read, listen to the choir, you get to know a lot of different music. So it was just immersing yourself in lots of different things, really.
So where did you go from your postgrad studies?
Well, I sort of extended them a bit back in the days when you didn't have to pay so much money to do things like that. And it got to the point really where I was starting to get freelance work while I was still a student. So it sort of dovetailed in. I started to do work with the orchestras in Manchester, with the Halle and the BBC Philharmonic, which I still do. I think that was because, although I'd given up the cello, I hadn't lost my love of orchestral music, and doing the orchestral keyboard was a way of keeping in touch with that. And in terms of doing the playing for choirs, which was a sort of handy way to earn money and get into it, that sort of developed into doing more of the conducting side and chorus mastering. So that sort of gradually changed over the years from more of an accompanying emphasis to a conducting emphasis. And something that came a little bit later was arranging. I'd always been interested in orchestration, things like that. But as you get into conducting choirs, I found that was an outlet for doing arrangement for the choirs, whether it was on unaccompanied stuff or with orchestras or brass bands. Brass bands were a very steep learning curve for me, actually. Seeing that score for the first time with everything in treble clef, that was. But I got some lessons. I had a composition teacher at university, Philip Wilby, who's a great brass band composer, and he gave me a lot of help with that. So really, in order to, like a lot of musicians, in order to survive, you have to do a lot of different things.
Yes. And you've got to play with some great international orchestras as well.
Oh yeah, I mean that's just been fantastic. I mean some keyboard players don't like playing in orchestras because it veers between, sometimes you have something really difficult to do but it doesn't last very long, or sometimes you just sit there and then you play, like the last thing I did this week, I think I had 11 notes in the concert. But then, you know, you're getting paid to sit there and listen to some fantastic music and you then join in sometimes. So that's a really positive thing as well.
And then of course you've got to, you've been teaching organ at some wonderful places like the Royal Northern College of Music. You've had some great opportunities as an educator as well. Oh
yeah, and I think that I do love doing that, because the thing I find with the teaching is it really makes you reflect on the way you play yourself and what you're doing. And also it gives you an incentive to keep practicing. You see all these brilliant young people coming up. But having to help them through stuff makes you think about approaches to practicing and to music in ways you hadn't necessarily thought of before. So you can sort of take that over into your own playing. So I always feel I learn as much from the students as I'm trying to teach them myself.
So tell us about your improvisation journey.
Well, like a lot of people, when I started playing, I always liked sort of, messing about on the piano, I suppose. And actually, one of the best things my parents did, and I think it almost happened by accident, was when I was about 13 or 14, they got me some harmony lessons. And that was really fantastic. It was mainly sort of paper-based, but there was keyboard stuff as well. And I'd always done messing about, but this sort of put some structure on it and made me understand what I was doing. And obviously improvisation is very handy for organists, so I'd always done a bit of that in church. And when I was a student at the RNCM, we had a visiting tutor in improvisation, Nigel Allcoat, who many people will know, who's very brilliant. And he really helped me to sort of put some structure and order into what I was doing. But the films didn't come till quite a lot later, actually. That was, it must have been a good 15 years, I think, after I left college that I first did a silent film. And that just came about because somebody I knew who wanted to put a concert on knew that I liked improvising and said, why don't you come and improvise to this film? And it was The Phantom of the Opera. That was the first one I did. And I just thought it was great fun. I really enjoyed it.
So in terms of, so that was your first one, presumably then, as a new thing, there was a lot of preparation you had to put into that, a lot of groundwork to know where you were going to go, how you were going to structure what you were doing according to the scenes, etc.
Yes, I mean there always is with films, because and I sort of learnt things that you should do and shouldn't do in terms of preparing as I went along. One thing I learnt quite quickly was that for an amount of preparation time, you should prioritise getting to know the film rather than trying to work out exactly what you're going to play. I've always found it quite natural to sit down and make things up at the keyboard, but actually the main thing is not having any surprises when you see the film. And if the film's an hour and a half long, that means watching it quite a lot of times. Of course, in total silence. It's actually incredibly... watching a silent film in total silence is really quite dull. When the films have got no music, they seem twice as long.
So are you then writing notes about scenes and putting something on paper?
Not really, no. I mean, the thing, the only time I ever write things down on paper is if films have got very complicated intercuts between different sections. You know, like you've got two simultaneous things going on in different places as part of the action, and it cuts from one to the other. I might write things down then. Otherwise, I'm not going to have notes in front of me when I play, so I know it needs to be in my head. In terms of what to do musically, what I tend to do is work out some main themes. If it's a drama, I'm really talking about, for the main characters in the film, and I'll work out how it's going to start, you know, a sort of opening title sequence just in terms of the themes. And I might work out what I'm going to do at sort of climactic or key moments in the film. But I can't work it out any more detail than that because I just wouldn't be able to remember it.
Yeah. And it would take away the spontaneity.
It would, and I do find quite often that I've thought of something I'll do at a particular moment, but when it gets to the actual thing, I'll think of something better. And the other thing I've found is I used to get to venues and I used to try and sort of run the whole film and do a trial run in the afternoon. But that never really seemed to work somehow. I never really liked what I did until the audience was there listening to it as well. There was something about knowing that the audience is experiencing the film with you.
So the art of performing kind of inspires you a little bit more when you've got the audience.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, there are certain things, and I'll talk about particular films later. There are certain scenes in certain films where I know that this sound will work, or this kind of registration, or and the other thing that I had to think about was what do you, when you're deciding what to illustrate, do you try and illustrate everything that's going on in the film, or do you go for a more general thing? And I think the approach there is to just listen to what the great film composers do. They will illustrate particular things, but actually it's more interesting to illustrate things that you can't see. So, for instance, if a character's thinking about another character, or they're thinking about a certain event, you can sort of recall that in the music, things that might be affecting them. And if you know that there's a surprise coming in the film, you can build the tension a bit, but on the other hand, you don't want to give too much away. So it's kind of, and I suppose it's the same as playing a piece. You know, when you're practicing a big piece, you have to decide how much to dwell on all the little details and bring them out, or whether that's at the expense of giving a kind of overall shape and a structure to the thing. And that's true in films as well.
And I suppose there's also a balance between finding the emotion that you think the character's thinking and feeling but might not be directly showing, so the intention behind their actions sometimes, and also going, if you went too far, things could become almost like a cliche.
Yeah, absolutely, there's definitely that. And I think you're dependent a bit then on the quality of the film. You know, if you go to one of the great directors like Hitchcock, who some people don't realise actually made quite a lot of silent films, which are fantastic, and they feel quite modern because the acting can be quite understated. And then there's lots of sort of subtle psychological things you can bring into play there. Another thing you have to deal with in silent films is that some of them have aged better than others. You know, some of them are kind of unintentionally comic in places. And if it only happens a bit, then I think it's best to try and go with the intention of the director and you know, take it seriously because it's meant to be taken seriously. And sometimes you can sort of tell how successful you're being by picking up on whether the audience are actually laughing or not. Sometimes you have to go with it and just, it seems funny, so you go with it and you can make it funny as well.
Well, I am really looking forward to finding out the Darius Battiwalla nuggets of inspiration for silent movie improvisation. Thank you so much, Darius.
Thank you.